Hello and welcome to Silent Echo. Before we continue, subscribe to Silent Echo and like this video if you want more quiet, serious investigations into real disappearances, cold cases, and the places that still hold their secrets. In August of 1934, a game warden in North Idaho drove his Model A Ford to the edge of a cemetery, locked the car, left his lunch and his coat inside, and walked into the mountains to investigate poachers. He was supposed to come back that afternoon. He never did. Searchers found evidence of illegally killed deer. They found signs of game birds taken out of season. They brought in bloodhounds. They sent airplanes over the mountains. They closed local mines so hundreds of men could join the search. But they never found the warden. Not his body. Not his badge. Not the final place where he stood. For 90 years, his name remained attached to a question the mountains would not answer. Then, almost a century later, after his family had grown old with the story, investigators said they finally knew what happened. Not because they found remains, not because a weapon surfaced, not because a lost police file appeared in a courthouse basement, but because several people came forward with the same story, a story passed down through families for generations, about poachers in the woods, two boys who were there, and a man who never came home. This is the story of Deputy Game Warden Ellsworth Arthur Teed, a man who entered Boulder Gulch on duty, a man whose search became one of the largest recorded in Shoshone County history, a man whose body has never been recovered, and a case that may be officially closed, but still leaves one haunting question behind. Where is he? The town of Mullan sits in the mountains of northern Idaho, close to the Montana line, in a landscape built from steep ridges, timber, mining roads, and narrow gulches that disappear into heavy forest. In the 1930s, this was not a soft place. It was a place of mines, a place of hard shifts and hard winters, a place where the mountains were not scenery, but work, boundary, danger, and livelihood. Men went underground for ore. Families lived in small communities pressed close to the slopes. Roads followed the land where they could. Gulches carried water, shadows, and sometimes rumors. Beyond the houses and mining structures, the forest rose quickly. Not a distant wilderness, but an immediate one. The kind of place where a man could walk from town into trees and within minutes become difficult to see. Boulder Gulch was part of that world. It was not a famous tourist trail. It was not a place designed for postcards. It was practical terrain, rough terrain, a place where people hunted, moved quietly, and knew there were areas where law could arrive slowly. That mattered in 1934. The country was deep in the Great Depression. Money was scarce. Food mattered. Wild game mattered. For some families, hunting was not recreation, it was survival. But there were laws, seasons, limits, closed periods, rules meant to protect wildlife from being stripped out of the mountains. Those laws had to be enforced by men who often worked alone. Game wardens were not just uniformed observers. They entered places where illegal hunters might be armed. They confronted men who had already chosen to break the law. They carried authority into terrain where authority could feel very far away. That was the work Ellsworth Arthur Teed had accepted. He was not a distant bureaucrat in an office. He was a man of the same mountain world he served. He grew up in Idaho. He knew work. He had spent years in mines before moving his young family to Shoshone County. He was an outdoorsman, and when he became a deputy game warden for Idaho Fish and Game, the job fit the outline of his life. He knew the land. He knew the people. He knew what it meant to move through the mountains with purpose. By the summer of 1934, Teed was assigned to enforce fish and wildlife regulations in Shoshone County. The work could be quiet, a patrol, a report, a conversation, a warning. But it could also turn dangerous without warning. That is one of the truths often lost when people imagine old game wardens. The image can feel almost peaceful. A man in the woods, a badge, a rifle, a knowledge of deer and streams and hunting seasons. But the reality was more complicated. A game warden could be alone, outnumbered, and facing men who did not want to be caught. In rural America, especially during hard economic times, enforcement work could carry personal risk. Not every poacher was violent. Most were not. But a man caught taking deer out of season could face fines, embarrassment, jail, loss of equipment, and public exposure. If he was desperate enough or angry enough, a simple encounter in the trees could become something much darker. That is the world Ellsworth Teed walked into. The known story begins before the disappearance itself. The day before he vanished, Teed had found evidence suggesting illegal hunting in the area near Boulder Gulch. Later accounts described unlawfully killed deer and evidence of game birds harvested during closed season. This was not a vague rumor by the time he returned. He had reason to believe something was happening, and on the morning of August 28, 1934, he left home to follow up. At home was his wife Alma. Their family life was not an abstraction in this case. It matters because the timeline depends on who he was expected to be. He was a husband, a father, a man whose routines were known by the people closest to him. He had 3 sons. At the time of his disappearance, they were still children. Later, family members would describe them as extremely close to their father. That closeness matters because the idea that Teed simply walked away from his life never fit the shape of the evidence. He was not a man drifting without ties. He was not a man who failed to tell his wife when plans changed. According to later reporting, Alma told authorities it was unlike him to be gone overnight without letting her know. On that morning, Teed told Alma where he was going. Boulder Gulch, south of Mullan. He was going to investigate the illegal harvest of game. He also had a reason to return. He was expected later that day at the funeral of a young neighbor. The funeral detail is small, but it carries weight. In small communities, funerals are not casual appointments. They are obligations. They are acts of presence. And according to the later official framing of the case, this was a service he would not have missed. So when Teed left home that morning, there was no open-ended uncertainty. He was not heading out for a long patrol with no return time. He was going somewhere specific for a specific reason. He expected to return. He drove his Model A Ford Coupe toward the upper Mullan Cemetery near Boulder Gulch. That vehicle would become one of the central objects in the case, because when a person disappears, the things left behind often become the last witnesses. A car can tell a limited story: where it was parked, whether it was locked, what was inside, what was missing, what did not happen. Teed's car was found near where he had said he was going. It was locked. His lunch was inside. His coat was inside. Those details matter. A packed lunch left behind suggests he did not intend to sit somewhere and eat before moving deeper. A coat left behind can suggest the conditions did not require it at that moment, or that he expected to return to the car. A locked car suggests intention and control. He had not fled in panic. He had not abandoned the vehicle in visible disorder. He had parked, secured it, and gone on foot. From there, the story becomes a narrowing corridor. A man leaves his vehicle. A man enters the woods. A man does not return. There is no confirmed witness who sees the final moment. No known written report from him after that point. No clear physical trail that later leads searchers to a body. The mountain takes over the narrative. By the afternoon, when Teed did not appear where he was expected, concern would have started to form. But in rural mountain work, lateness alone can be explained. A patrol takes longer. A road is rough. A lead requires more time. A man stops to talk. At first, absence can disguise itself as delay. That is one of the cruelest features of missing person cases. There is often a period in which the world has already changed, but no one knows it yet. For Alma Teed, that period ended the next morning. When he had not come home by August 29, she alerted authorities. She understood the difference between a delayed husband and something wrong. The response that followed was enormous for its time and place. City, county, and state officials mobilized. Local volunteers joined. Mines in the region reportedly closed so workers could help search. Men from the Morning Mine in Mullan, the Bunker Hill Mine in Kellogg, and the Hecla Mine in Burke became part of the effort. This detail gives the search a scale that can be easy to miss. A missing game warden in 1934 did not trigger a modern search grid with GPS tracks, helicopters with thermal systems, and digital coordination. But it did trigger something powerful in a mining community: human force. Men who knew the land, men used to rough conditions, men who could climb, push through brush, follow old roads, and keep going. They did not find him. Bloodhounds were brought from the penitentiary in Walla Walla. That detail is striking because it shows how quickly officials understood that ordinary searching was not enough. Dogs can do what men cannot. They can read a trail that is invisible. They can follow the human trace after the body is out of sight. But in the Teed case, even that did not solve the problem. Airplanes were used. Newspaper accounts and later summaries describe aircraft searching from above and wider efforts across surrounding areas. Searchers looked over the hills south of Mullan and toward the St. Joe district in Montana. They pushed into country that was not small and not forgiving. And still, the central fact stayed unchanged. Ellsworth Teed was gone. The search became one of the largest recorded search efforts in Shoshone County history. That phrase is easy to read past, but it means something. It means this was not a brief look around the last known location. It was not a family search that faded after a day. It was a regional event, a public effort, a manhunt, as newspapers of the era described it. It involved 3 states, bloodhounds, airplanes, and thousands of civilian search hours. And yet the result remained almost empty. Not empty because nothing at all was found. That would have been one kind of mystery. But what they found did not lead to Teed. They found evidence connected to illegal game. 3 shallow graves containing deer were located in the area. Feathers were found, supporting the idea that game birds had also been taken during a closed season. These discoveries were not incidental. They supported the reason Teed had gone there in the first place. He had not imagined the poaching. He had not followed a meaningless rumor into the woods. There was unlawful hunting activity in the area. The crime he was investigating had a physical presence. Dead deer, feathers, concealment. Someone had been there before him. Someone had reason not to want a game warden walking into that place. This is where the case stops being only a disappearance and becomes something more focused. Because if Teed had simply become lost, the poaching evidence would still be relevant only as background. But if he had been killed, it might have been the reason. A warden following evidence. A poacher interrupted. A confrontation in the trees. A body removed before searchers could find it. That possibility existed early. According to reporting from the time, Alma feared he may have been injured in an accident or met with violence at the hands of others. Those were the 2 broad possibilities from the beginning. Accident, violence. For decades, neither could be proven publicly, and that uncertainty is what made the case endure. The official search continued for well over a month until weather made further searching impossible. Think about that. A month, not hours. Not a weekend. More than a month of effort, speculation, sightings, clues, rumors, and disappointment. Newspapers reported hot clues. Sightings were mentioned. Rewards were offered. But later summaries note that sightings were discounted or not confirmed, and the hot clues were never publicly clarified. That kind of information is difficult for a documentary storyteller. It tempts exaggeration. A hot clue sounds dramatic. A reported sighting sounds cinematic. But the responsible approach is simpler. They were reported. They were not enough. They did not bring him home. That is all we can safely say. The silence after a failed search is different from the panic at the beginning. At the beginning, everyone moves because there is still a belief that movement can change the outcome. By the end, the landscape has been crossed and recrossed. Men have looked into gullies. Dogs have been worked. Planes have passed overhead. The community has given time and labor. The family has waited, and nothing has changed. That is when a missing person becomes something else. A permanent absence, a story people learn to live beside. In Mullan and Shoshone County, that story stayed. Ellsworth Teed had gone into Boulder Gulch. His car had been found. His lunch and coat were inside. The deer graves were real. The evidence of poaching was real, but the man himself had disappeared. For his family, this was not folklore. It was not a case file. It was a destroyed center of life. His 3 sons were between the ages of 8 and 14 when he vanished. Old enough to remember him, young enough to need him. Family members would later say they had long wondered whether he had died by accident or at the hands of another person. That question carried through generations. No funeral with a body, no grave in the ordinary sense, no final explanation. In 1942, more than 7 years after the disappearance, Ellsworth Arthur Teed was officially declared dead by a Shoshone County court. That declaration was not an answer. It was an administrative necessity, a way for the legal world to acknowledge what the physical world had refused to show. After a certain point, life requires paperwork, benefits, records, status. But a death declaration without a body does not end the human question. It only puts a date on the absence. For decades, the Teed case remained in that state. Known locally, remembered by family, mentioned through clippings, a mystery attached to a mountain road and an old job, but not solved. One of the challenges with cases this old is the decay of records. Police reports vanish. Officers die. Newspapers become the main archive. Memory becomes layered with retelling. What was once investigation becomes oral history. What was once evidence becomes rumor unless it can be corroborated. That is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the story. The Teed case is a case about disappearance, but it is also a case about time. What time destroys, what time preserves, and what time changes from evidence into legend. For nearly 9 years, the publicly known facts were limited. A game warden left home. He was investigating illegal hunting. His car was found near Boulder Gulch. Evidence of poaching was found. A huge search failed. He was declared dead. No body was recovered. That was the spine of the story. Enough to haunt, not enough to close. Then, in the 21st century, the case shifted. Not because the mountains gave him back, not because a skeleton was found after a wildfire or a flood, but because the act of honoring him reopened the door. In 2023, Idaho Fish and Game announced that Ellsworth Arthur Teed had been accepted into both the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and the Idaho Peace Officers Memorial. He was recognized as an officer lost in the line of duty. Nearly 90 years after August 28, 1834, his name was being formally placed among those who had died serving the public. That recognition brought renewed attention, and attention can do something strange in old cases. It can reach people who have been carrying stories they never thought mattered, or stories they assumed everyone already knew, or stories too old, too family-bound, or too uncomfortable to repeat. After the renewed attention, people came forward. According to later reporting, 4 individuals provided accounts connected to what they had heard about Teed's death. The accounts involved George Pentland, his teenage son John Robert Pentland, and another teenager, Oscar Downing. The story, as later summarized by officials, was that they were poaching in the Mullan area, came across Teed, and George Pentland killed him, with the 2 boys helping dispose of the body. This is the point where the case becomes delicate, because there was no trial, no living suspect to question, no body, no released witness statements, no weapon placed in public evidence, no surviving police report that lays out a neat chain of proof. Shoshone County officials acknowledged the difficulty of separating hearsay, speculation, and fact in a 90-year-old case without remains that has to remain part of the narrative. The case is considered closed by the sheriff's office, but the closure rests on corroborated later statements and investigative evaluation not on the kind of physical evidence that most viewers expect in a modern homicide case. That does not make it meaningless. It makes it old. It makes it complicated. It makes it the kind of case where truth may arrive through the only channel still open. Memory passed down from people who were close enough to hear something they were never supposed to carry. Captain Seth Green of the Shoshone County Sheriff's Office described the accounts as extensive and detailed, and said investigators verified family trees and interviewed the people who came forward. He also said the office believed the accounts could not simply have been copied from one another. That was the point of corroboration. Separate people. Similar story. Connections that traced back to the original event. For such an old case, officials described that as the best available resolution. And so the county closed it. George Pentland was identified as the suspect in Teed's death. The man who had vanished in 1934 was no longer simply a missing warden. He was, according to the official closure, the victim of a homicide committed while he was performing his duties. But even then, the mountain kept the final piece. His remains were not searched for in any new large effort. Officials said the area had experienced fires and heavy rains over decades, and that environmental forces could have moved remains far from any original location. After 90 years, even knowing where to look becomes almost impossible. A body can move, a slope can fail, a stream can carry bone, animals can scatter remains, fire can alter a landscape, roads can change, maps can shift. What was once a hidden burial spot or a disposal site can become an area so altered that it no longer resembles the place described. And so the case closes in a way that is both satisfying and incomplete. A suspect named, a family given a measure of closure, a line of duty death recognized, but no body, no grave, no final recovered evidence from the mountain itself. That tension is why the story still matters. Because there are cases where closure arrives cleanly, a confession, a recovery, a trial, a sentence, a location marked. And then there are cases like this, where the official answer comes too late for justice in court, too late for the wife who waited, too late for the sons who grew up without their father, too late for the searchers who walked the hills, too late for the first investigators who suspected violence but could not prove it. The Teed case asks a different question from many modern disappearances, not simply what happened, but what is an answer worth when it arrives, after almost everyone who needed it most is gone. To understand why the story held so much weight, you have to understand the profession Teed represented. A deputy game warden in 1934 did not have the support systems that modern conservation officers often rely on. Radio coverage could be limited or non-existent in remote terrain. Backup could be far away. Roads were rough. Communication was slow. A warden might receive a tip, drive out, park, and walk alone toward armed men. That is not an exaggeration of the job. That is the practical reality. Wildlife enforcement has always carried a risk that is easy to underestimate. People think of crimes against wildlife as lesser crimes. A deer taken out of season, birds killed illegally, meat hidden, feathers left behind. But the people who enforce those laws are still confronting lawbreakers, often in isolated places, often where firearms are present by the nature of the activity. The danger does not come from the deer. It comes from the human being who does not want to be caught. In the Depression era, that confrontation could carry additional pressure. A poached deer might mean food. It might also mean illegal profit or habit or defiance. A warden arriving in that moment represented fines, arrest, shame, and the loss of what had been taken. A man in that situation might run. He might argue, he might surrender, or he might do something irreversible. The official closure of Teed's case points toward that last possibility. But the scene itself remains unseen. We do not know precisely how the confrontation began. We do not know whether Teed spoke first. We do not know whether he recognized the men. We do not know if the boys were close enough to understand what was about to happen. We do not know whether there was an argument, a threat, an attempt to make an arrest, or a sudden attack. A responsible script cannot invent those details. It can only hold the space where they would have been, and that space is powerful enough. A warden enters the gulch. Poachers are there. Illegal deer are hidden in shallow graves. Game birds have been taken. Something happens. The warden never returns. The suspected killer is named Nina years later. That is the core. Everything else is atmosphere, consequence, and the long shape of uncertainty. The place itself remains central. Boulder Gulch was not a random point on a map. It was the location Teed named, the location where his car was found nearby, the area tied to the illegal game evidence. In missing person cases, the last known location can become almost symbolic. It is the edge of knowledge. Before it, the facts are firm. After it, the facts collapse. For Teed, that edge was his locked car near the cemetery and the mouth of the gulch. The cemetery detail is haunting without any need for embellishment. He parked near a place already devoted to the dead, then walked into a different kind of absence. His own body would never be brought back to be buried. The image is almost too direct. A Model A coupe near the cemetery. A coat and lunch still inside. A man expected back for a funeral. A search that turned the mountains into a question. The story contains the kind of symmetry that fiction would make too obvious. But this was not fiction. This was the practical sequence of a real disappearance. When Alma waited for him, she was not waiting inside a mystery. She was waiting inside a normal day that had failed to complete itself. That emotional reality matters because long, cold cases can become too clean in retrospect. We talk about suspects. We talk about evidence. We talk about memorials and county closures. But at the center, there is a woman who knew something was wrong, because the man she knew did not come home. There are children who lost a father in a way that did not even give them a body to mourn. There is a community that searched and failed. There are decades in which rumors may have moved through families, while the official record stayed quiet. And there is a question that outlived almost everyone. When the case was reopened in modern times, it was not reopened with the tools viewers often expect. There was no DNA to test, no surveillance video to enhance, no cell phone ping, no digital footprint, no vehicle GPS, no text message. The case belonged to a different world. Paper clippings, court records, family stories, old maps, names repeated across generations. That makes it harder to tell, but also more revealing. Modern viewers are used to evidence that feels mechanical. A timestamp, a location record, a lab report. But older cases often depend on human memory and human silence. Someone knew, someone told someone. Someone repeated it quietly. Someone carried it forward. Someone, decades later, decided it mattered enough to tell authorities. That is not the kind of evidence that gives a courtroom scene, but it can give a family something they never had. A direction, a name, a likely answer. The weakness of the case, from a documentary perspective, is also its strength. There is no dramatic final proof, no recovered remains, no confrontation described in official public detail, no trial transcript, no confession played in audio. If a storyteller tries to treat the 2024 closure like a fully proven courtroom narrative, the story becomes dishonest. But if we treat it as what it is, a very old case officially closed after corroborated family accounts and renewed investigation, it becomes more haunting. Because it shows the strange way truth can survive, not in evidence bags, not in files, but in people, in whispers, in stories that should have died but did not. For 90 years, the mountains kept the body, but the human side of the story did not stay buried completely. That is the unsettling thing. The land may erase tracks. Weather may destroy remains. Documents may vanish, but memory can travel in another direction. Through kitchens, through family stories, through things said after someone has had too much to drink, through warnings, through shame, through old men telling younger relatives something they are not supposed to repeat, through the uneasy knowledge that a story in the family is not just a story. By the time officials heard the accounts, everyone directly involved in 1934 was gone. George Pentland was gone. The boys were gone. Teed's wife was gone. Many of the searchers were gone. His sons had lived most or all of their lives without the answer. This is what time does to justice. It can turn a homicide into history before the truth has a chance to arrive. And when the truth finally comes, there is no one left to prosecute, no sentence to impose, no testimony to challenge in court, no formal confrontation between the accused and the evidence. Only a record corrected, a family told what likely happened, a badge placed in the memorial category where it belonged. There is dignity in that, but there is also loss, because recognition is not the same as recovery. Closure is not the same as restoration, and an officially named suspect does not bring back the final physical truth of where Teed was left. This is where the story separates itself from a simple cold case solution. If the question is whether the sheriff's office considers the matter solved, the answer is yes. If the question is whether every detail is known, the answer is no. If the question is whether the body has been found, the answer is still no. The final resting place of Ellsworth Arthur Teed remains unknown, and that means the landscape still holds something. Maybe only bone fragments scattered beyond recovery. Maybe a place changed beyond recognition. Maybe nothing that can ever be found. But the physical absence remains. That absence links the 1934 disappearance to the kind of cases Silent Echo returns to again and again. Not because they are supernatural, not because they prove something beyond reason, but because they show how incomplete reality can be. A man can live a documented life, hold a documented job, leave on a documented duty, trigger a documented search, be officially declared dead, be officially honored, have a suspect officially named, and still never be found. That is the contradiction at the center of this case. The answer arrived. The body did not. To understand the search, imagine the first days after August 29. The town knows the warden is missing. His wife has raised the alarm. The car is found locked. The lunch and coat are still there. The gulch is not quiet anymore. Men move through timber. Officials coordinate. Bloodhounds work the ground. Planes cut over ridges. Newspapers begin printing updates. Every person involved understands that the odds change with time. If Teed is injured, he needs to be found quickly. If he has fallen, the terrain must reveal the place. If he has been attacked, the evidence may already be disappearing. If someone moved his body, then every hour matters. At first, there must have been hope. A man like Teed could be hurt but alive. He could be in a ravine. He could have broken a leg. He could have followed someone deeper than expected. He could be waiting for help. But the longer the search went on, the more each practical explanation began to strain. An accident usually leaves a zone of probability, a fall site, a track, a broken branch, a piece of clothing. A shout heard by someone, a dog pulling toward a ravine. But nothing decisive emerged. Voluntary disappearance made even less sense. The locked car, the lunch, the coat, the funeral, the family, the job, the known purpose of the trip, the absence of preparation. None of it supports a planned disappearance. That left violence as the explanation many people suspected but could not prove. And violence in the woods has a different investigative shape than violence in a room. A room can hold blood, walls, floors, objects, a witness in the next apartment. The woods absorb. Rain falls. Animals move. Searchers trample. Leaves shift. Soil changes. A hidden body can remain hidden indefinitely if the location is remote enough and the people who know it never tell. Boulder Gulch and the surrounding country offered exactly that kind of uncertainty. It was close enough to town for men to use. Remote enough for secrets. The searchers found the illegal deer. That means they were close to part of the truth. But they did not find the man who had come to investigate that truth. The deer graves are among the strongest pieces of the story because they connect Teed's intention to a real crime scene. They show that his mission had substance. They show that poachers had tried to conceal what they had done. And they suggest that someone had something to lose if Teed completed his work. But they do not tell us the final moment. They do not name who held a weapon. They do not tell us whether Teed saw the graves before he encountered anyone. They do not tell us whether he surprised the poachers, or the poachers surprised him. They do not tell us whether he was killed near the graves or somewhere else. They are evidence of motive and setting, not a complete sequence. That is the discipline this case requires. It is tempting to turn the scene into a movie. Teed steps through brush. A twig breaks. A man turns. A gun is raised. But none of that is documented publicly in detail. The real horror is not in invented action. It is in the fact that we do not need it. We already know enough. A warden went in. Poaching evidence was there. He disappeared. 90 years later, officials said poachers killed him. That is enough. The rest belongs to the silence between facts. For the community, the disappearance would have been both public and intimate. Everyone knew the search. Everyone saw the disruption. The mines closing would have been impossible to miss. In a mining town, shutting work so men could search means the disappearance moved through the economy of the place. It was not a private family matter. It was a community emergency. And when a community searches that hard and fails, the failure becomes part of local memory. People remember where they looked. They remember rumors. They remember names. They remember what older relatives said. They remember what was never resolved. Over decades, those memories change form. Some become exaggerated. Some fade. Some turn into local legend. Some remain uncomfortably specific. The Teed case seems to have lived in that last category, not just a vague rumor that something bad happened, but according to investigators, separate family narratives with enough detail and enough consistency to support closure. That is rare. It is also unsettling, because it suggests that somewhere in the region, for generations, the answer may have been circulating in pieces, not in the official file, not in court, but in private. This is one of the most painful possibilities in old cases, that the truth was not unknowable. It was known by the wrong people, known quietly, known without consequence, known too late. When the sheriff's office closed the case, they did not release every detail. That restraint may be frustrating for viewers, but it is understandable. The people involved were long dead. The statements belonged to families. The body was not recovered. The case was closed for historical and investigative purposes, not for prosecution. Releasing every detail might not serve justice, but it leaves the public with a partial account, a named suspect, a broad scenario, corroborating statements, no remains. That partiality is part of the story. It means the official answer is more than speculation, but less than the complete forensic resolution modern audiences are trained to expect. We should not overstate it. We also should not ignore its significance. For Idaho Fish and Game, for Shoshone County, and for Teed's descendants, the closure mattered. It placed his death in the line of duty. It recognized the risk of his work. It gave his family a clearer answer than they had carried for decades. And it returned his name to public attention, not as a vanished man only, but as an officer who likely died because he was doing his job. There is a difference. A missing man can become a mystery. A fallen officer becomes part of a larger history of service and danger. Teed's acceptance into the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and the Idaho Peace Officers Memorial changed how the story was framed. He was no longer simply the game warden who disappeared. He was the game warden lost in the line of duty. That public recognition is powerful, but it also reopens the human sorrow, because for his wife and children, he had always been more than a public name. The memorial came nearly 90 years later. They needed him in 1934. They needed answers in 1934. They needed a body. They needed a funeral. They needed the truth. while it could still shape their lives. Instead, they received absence. The three sons grew up with a father who existed in memory and uncertainty. Family members later described the loss as devastating. That kind of loss has a long reach. It changes households. It changes stories told to grandchildren. It changes the way a family understands safety, duty, and silence. When people came forward decades later, they were not just helping close a public case. They were changing the story a family had lived with for almost a century. That takes courage. It can also carry shame, because old family stories may implicate people who share a name or bloodline. Even when everyone involved is dead, coming forward can feel like exposing the past. One family member connected to Teed expressed gratitude that people did come forward and said, no, one should be ashamed of the past when closure can come from telling the truth. That idea is central. The past does not stay harmless because it is old. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes the only way to give the dead back their names is for the living to speak. The accused man, George Pentland, cannot answer the allegation now. That must be said. He was named after death. There was no trial, no defense, no courtroom test. But the sheriff's office did not present the closure as a casual guess. They said multiple people came forward. They said the accounts were corroborated. They said investigators mapped and checked relationships to make sure the stories did not simply come from one shared source. They decided the case could be closed. In historical cold cases, that is sometimes the strongest form an answer can take. Not perfect, not complete, but reasoned, supported. Enough for the agency responsible to change the status of the case. Still, the final physical question remains. If Teed was killed by poachers, where was his body taken? Was he buried? Was he concealed in terrain searchers did not reach? Was he moved farther than anyone expected? Was the disposal site later altered by fire, rain, erosion, logging, roadwork, or natural movement? There may be no way to know, and that is why the case continues to feel unresolved even after closure. Human beings are physical. We want the place. We want the grave. We want the last point to be marked. Without it, the story floats between answer and absence. The official record can close. The landscape does not confess. That makes the Teed case one of the strangest kinds of mysteries. A solved disappearance without a recovery. A homicide without a body. A line of duty death without a known grave. A family story that became an official answer after 90 years. And a mountain gulch that still has not given back the man who entered it. When building a long documentary around this case, there is a danger of making the landscape seem mystical. It is not necessary. The mountains did not need to be supernatural to hide him. They only needed to be vast, rough, and familiar to the wrong people. The trees did not need intention. The gulch did not need a curse. Human violence, remote terrain, and time can create a mystery deep enough. In fact, that is what makes the story more disturbing. It did not require anything impossible. Only a man doing his job. Another man or men willing to stop him. A place where a body could be hidden. And enough silence to last 90 years. There is also danger in making Teed seem reckless. The evidence does not require that either. He was going where his duty led him. He had investigated poaching evidence the day before. He returned to follow up. That was the work. To modern eyes, entering such a situation alone may seem dangerous, but in that time and that profession, it was likely ordinary. That ordinary danger is important. Many tragedies begin not with a wild decision, but with a routine one. A ranger starts patrol. A deputy answers a call. A warden follows a tip. A worker drives the road he has driven before. The day looks normal until it is no longer recoverable. For Teed, the normal day ended somewhere beyond his car. The exact place is unknown. The last known evidence that belongs to him is the car itself. Locked. Lunch inside. Coat inside. That car is the anchor. Everything before it is life. Everything after it is silence. If this story were told through images, the car would carry the first act. Not because old vehicles are cinematic, but because it is the one object that holds his attention. He planned to return to it. He did not. His lunch is not dramatic, but it is human. A packed lunch means a person expected a day to continue. It is one of the simplest details in the case, and one of the strongest, because death and disappearance often become abstract, but lunch is ordinary. A coat is ordinary. A car locked near a cemetery is ordinary. The horror comes from the fact that ordinary things remained, and the man did not. Searchers would have seen that. They would have opened or inspected the vehicle. They would have understood quickly that this was not a man who drove away. The investigation had a boundary. He left from here on foot. Somewhere beyond this point, the story breaks. The shallow-deered graves add a second anchor. They show another human presence, concealment, illegal activity, the kind of act a warden was meant to uncover. Those graves are not just evidence of poaching, they are evidence of secrecy. Someone had already attempted to hide a violation before Teed vanished. That pattern matters. First the deer were hidden. Then, according to the later official closure, the warden was hidden too. The mind makes the connection even if the evidence cannot fill every step. A hidden crime, an officer arrives, an officer disappears. The case lives in that progression. For decades, those physical anchors were surrounded by uncertainty. People may have asked why the dogs did not find him, why planes saw nothing, why searchers found the deer but not the warden, why the body never appeared, why no one was arrested, why names were rumored but not proven. And with each unanswered question, the case hardened. Not every cold case stays alive. Some fade because there is not enough story to hold them. This one stayed alive because the structure was too disturbing to disappear. A lawman investigating a crime vanishes where the crime occurred. His car is found. The crime evidence is found. He is not. That is a complete mystery in one sentence. The later closure gives the sentence an ending, but not a final image. And for viewers, that matters, because a story that ends with a suspect named can feel resolved, but a story that ends with no body remains visually incomplete. There is no final location to show, no recovered badge, no remains returned, no grave to stand over and say this is where the search ended. Instead, the ending is an announcement, a conclusion by investigators, a family relief, a historical correction, and beyond that the trees. When Shoshone County officials said they would not put resources into searching for the remains, that might sound unsatisfying, but it is also realistic. After 90 years, the environment is not the same. Even if one had a general area, general is not enough. The body could have been moved after death. It could have been buried shallowly and scattered. It could have been affected by animals. It could have been shifted by water, slope movement, or fire. If the location spanned a large area from Mullan toward Avery or beyond, as investigators described in broad terms, then the search becomes nearly impossible. Needle in a giant haystack was the idea. Except the needle may no longer be intact. That is the final cruelty of old wilderness cases. The truth can become more certain, while the evidence becomes less recoverable. The human story moves toward closure. The physical story moves further away. For a channel like Silent Echo, the case is valuable because it forces restraint. It would be easy to sensationalize. A vanished warden, poachers, a hidden body, a 90-year secret. But the deeper power is quieter. The power is in the ordinary morning. The wife who hears where he is going, the car near the cemetery, the searchers coming from mines, the bloodhounds, the plains, the shallow graves, the sons growing up without an answer, the memorial almost a century later, the phone calls or reports that finally bring old family stories into official hands, the final announcement that names a suspect and closes the case, and the absence that remains. That is a complete documentary arc, not because every detail is known, because every stage of uncertainty has weight. The disappearance, the failed search, the long silence, the late memory, the official closure, the missing body. Each stage changes the meaning of the one before it. In 1934, the car meant he had gone missing. By 1942, it meant he was legally dead. By 2023, it was part of the record of a fallen officer. By 2024, it became the beginning of an officially closed homicide narrative. Objects change meaning as answers change. But the object itself stays the same. A locked Model A Ford coupe, luncheon coat inside. A man gone. The Teed case also belongs to a larger tradition of wilderness law enforcement danger. Across American history, game wardens, conservation officers, and rangers have often worked in spaces where the law meets isolation. They enforce rules that some people see as personal interference. They confront armed individuals in places without witnesses. They protect resources that can seem abstract until someone is willing to kill over them. That context does not excuse anything. It explains the risk. Teed's death, as now understood by officials, was not a random disappearance in the woods. It was tied to his work. He was not simply a man who got lost near Boulder Gulch. He was there because he was enforcing game laws. That is why the memorial recognition matters. It restores the purpose of his presence. He was not wandering, he was serving. That distinction reshapes the entire case. When someone disappears during recreation, the story often becomes about decision-making, terrain, weather, and chance. When someone disappears during enforcement, the story becomes about duty and conflict. Teed was moving toward people who may have had reason to fear or resent him. That gives the case a human danger at its center, not a vague mountain hazard. A confrontation possibility, a motive, a crime adjacent to the disappearance. This is why the homicide explanation fits the known structure more strongly than accident or voluntary departure. Accident can explain why a man does not return. It struggles to explain why no body was found after such a massive search, though difficult terrain can sometimes do that. Voluntary departure can explain absence only if one ignores the family, the funeral, the locked car, the lunch, the coat, and the total lack of preparation. Homicide by poachers explains motive. It explains why the body might be deliberately concealed. It aligns with the illegal game evidence. It aligns with Alma's early fear that violence was possible. And now it aligns with the sheriff's official closure naming George Pentland as the suspect. But even the strongest explanation has limits. It does not give us the exact scene. It does not recover Teed. It does not tell us the precise location of disposal. It does not allow cross-examination. It does not replace a trial. That is why the theories section of this story should not pretend all possibilities are equal, but also should not pretend every detail is proven. The strongest current explanation is homicide connected to poaching. That is where the official closure points. The weaker explanation is accident in rugged terrain. Possible in general, less satisfying in this specific case because of the poaching evidence and later corroborated accounts. The weakest explanation is voluntary disappearance. It conflicts with the known personal and situational facts. That hierarchy matters. A documentary does not need false balance. It needs disciplined weight. The weight is with homicide. The mystery is in the missing body and the missing final details. There is also the question of why the truth took so long. Why did no one come forward earlier? There are many possible answers, and we must treat them carefully. Fear, family loyalty, shame. The belief that old stories were not proof. The assumption that everyone involved was dead and nothing could be done. The difficulty of accusing the dead. The way rural communities sometimes protect their own histories by not speaking too loudly. Any of these may have played a role, but the public record does not give one definitive reason. What we can say is that the renewed attention around Teed's memorial recognition appears to have prompted new information. That is important for cold cases broadly. Sometimes a case does not need a new technology. It needs visibility. It needs the right person to hear the name again. It needs someone to realize that what they were told as a family story is not just family history, it is evidence of a crime. Even late evidence can matter. Even hearsay, if corroborated and traced carefully, can change an official conclusion. That is what seems to have happened here. The case also shows how memorials can do more than honor. They can reactivate memory. A name placed on a memorial asks the public to look again. Who was he? What happened? Why does this death count? In Teed's case, the act of honoring him helped pull the story back into the present. That is a powerful reversal. For decades, the case sat behind time. Then the memorial brought it forward. And when it came forward, people answered. The result was not a recovered body, but it was something. A suspect named, a cause recognized, a family given words they had waited generations to hear. There is a temptation to call that closure. The family did. Investigators did. And in a legal or historical sense, it may be. But for the viewer, and for anyone sensitive to the physical reality of disappearance, closure remains complicated. Because the mind still returns to the gulch, to the car, to the place beyond the cemetery where Teed began walking. Somewhere between that car and the hidden deer, his life reached its final minutes. Someone knew where. Someone may have stood over him. Someone may have decided what to do with the body. Someone may have told the story later. But the land has not shown us the place. That is the unresolved image. Not whether he was likely killed, but where he was left. The final geography of Ellsworth Teed is still unknown, and in disappearance cases, geography matters. A body is not only evidence, it is a return. It allows a burial. It gives family a location. It turns absence into mourning. Without it, the missing person remains partially suspended, even after a death certificate, even after a memorial, even after a suspect is named. That is why this case still belongs to the world of vanishings. Because the man vanished completely enough that 90 years later, his remains are still missing. The case began in enforcement. It became a search. It turned into a cold case. It ended officially as a homicide. But physically, it remains a disappearance. The difference is subtle, but important. The answer to what happened may be known. The answer to where he is may not be. For the opening of a documentary, that is the strongest hook. A man walks into the mountains to catch poachers. His car is found locked near a cemetery. His lunch is still inside. The poached deer are found. The warden is not. 90 years later, investigators name the man they believe killed him. But the body is still gone. Every element is grounded. Every element is visual. Every element raises a question. The story does not need to shout. It only needs to be told in the order the facts demand. When we return to August 28, 1934, the day feels almost impossibly quiet. No cameras, no recordings, no emergency radio traffic, no body cam, no dispatch audio. Just a man leaving home. A wife hearing his destination, a car moving toward Boulder Gulch, a funeral he expected to attend, a lunch packed for an ordinary workday. That is the last normal layer. Then the evidence stops behaving like normal life. He does not return. His car remains. The search expands. The poacher's evidence is found. He is not. The silence lasts beyond weather, beyond the search season, beyond the year, beyond legal death, beyond the lives of many who knew him. Then, almost a century later, the silence breaks in the only way it still can, through stories. It is difficult to imagine what that must have felt like for the remaining family. To hear that the mystery was not just an accident swallowed by mountains, to hear that authorities believed he had been killed, to hear a name, to feel relief and grief at once. Because closure does not erase the years before it, it can even sharpen them. If the family now knows he was likely killed, then every year of not knowing becomes heavier in retrospect. Every search that failed, every rumor, every question his sons asked, every time someone wondered whether he had fallen or been murdered. The answer brings peace, but it also confirms the violence that had long been feared. That is not simple healing. It is complicated truth. The story of Ellsworth Arthur Teed is also the story of how a public servant can disappear into the margins of history. For years, his case may have been known mainly by local historians, family members, Idaho Fish and Game, and people interested in old cold cases. Then the memorial recognition restored public attention. That matters, because memory is an active process. If no one speaks a name, the name fades. If a case is not retold, its details are scattered. Teed's case came back because people made the effort to put his name where it belonged. That effort eventually helped produce new information. In that sense, remembering became investigative. The story itself became a tool. This is why true documentaries should not treat old cases as dead content. Some old cases still have living edges, a descendant, a clipping, a family secret, a new investigator willing to make calls, a memorial ceremony, a local article, a person who reads it and realizes they know something. The distance of time makes solving harder. But sometimes time also allows people to speak. When fear is gone, when loyalties have loosened, when the burden of silence becomes heavier than the risk of telling. We do not know the private reasons behind each person who came forward in the Teed case, but we know that they did, and that was enough to change the official ending. Still, for all the power of that late information, the physical case remains sparse. A filmmaker must resist the urge to create scenes that are not known. We cannot show Teed confronting Pentland as fact in specific detail. We cannot say what words were exchanged. We cannot say precisely how the body was disposed of. We cannot say where the two boys stood. We cannot say whether Teed knew he was in danger. Those things may have been part of the family accounts, but if they are not publicly released, they should not be presented as confirmed. The ethical version is stronger. It lets the absence remain, because the absence is the truth. The public does not know those details. The family may know more. Investigators may know more. But the open record gives us the outline, not the scene. And sometimes an outline is more haunting than a reconstructed scene. A man went in. A crime was there. He did not return. 4 accounts later pointed to a poacher killing him. The body is missing. That is enough. The question becomes what this story says beyond itself. It says that remote work can carry hidden danger. It says that small crimes can become violent when someone tries to enforce the law. It says that communities can search with everything they have and still fail. It says that answers can survive inside families longer than they survive inside records. It says that official closure and emotional closure are not always the same. And it says that sometimes a man can be found in history before he is found in the ground. Ellsworth Teed was found in that sense. His name was restored. His death was recognized. His case was closed. But he is still somewhere beyond the reach of the searchers who went out in 1934. That is the final contradiction. The story has an answer. The mountains still have the body. As the years passed after 1942, the world around the case changed completely. The Depression ended. Another war came and went. Mullan changed. Shoshone County changed. The mines changed. The roads changed. Idaho Fish and Game changed. Search and rescue changed. Law enforcement changed. But the old fact remained untouched. Teed had never been recovered. This kind of permanence can make a case feel almost frozen. But it is not frozen. It continues to affect people. Each generation inherits a slightly different version. For one generation, he is a missing husband. For another, a father who never came back. For another, a great uncle in a family story. For another, a name in a newspaper archive. For modern investigators, a cold case reopened through memorial research and public attention. For viewers now, a story of a warden, poachers, and the cost of silence. That is how a disappearance travels through time. It changes form, but it does not vanish. It becomes part of a family's emotional weather, always there, sometimes quiet, sometimes returning. In 2024, when the case was reported closed, it did not undo the years, but it changed the last line. For 90 years, the last line was that Ellsworth Teed disappeared while investigating poachers and was never found. Now the line is more specific. Investigators believe he was killed by George Pentland after encountering poachers in the Mullan area, and that the body was disposed of with help from 2 teenagers. That is a darker line, but it is also more complete. The cost of truth is that it removes softer possibilities. As long as a case is unresolved, families sometimes live with multiple endings. Maybe accident, maybe murder, maybe something else. Once investigators close the case as homicide, the range narrows. The mind stops drifting. It lands on violence. That can be painful. But it can also end the exhausting work of imagining. For the Teed family, the answer appears to have brought relief. That should be respected. Outsiders often become attached to the mystery of a case. Families usually want the opposite. They want the mystery to end. They want the person returned, or at least the truth named. They do not need endless speculation. They need enough certainty to rest. The public may still wonder about details, but the family was given something long denied, a recognized line of duty death, a named suspect, a conclusion from law enforcement. In a case this old, that is significant. There is a quiet dignity in the way the story ends now. No dramatic arrest, no courtroom victory, no recovered bones, just a recognition that a man who served Idaho likely died because he walked into danger while doing his job, and that the silence around his death lasted far too long. This is where the ending of the documentary should not become triumphant. The case is closed, but not solved in the emotional sense viewers expect. There is no justice for the accused because he is long dead. There is no punishment. There is no full physical recovery. There is no final scene at a grave. The ending should feel sober. It should acknowledge the answer while honoring the absence. That is the silent echo tone. Not sensational, not supernatural, not false certainty. A real case, a real man, a real search, a late official conclusion, and a remaining void. If there is a lesson in the Teed case, it is not that every old rumor is true. Most are not. It is not that every disappearance in the wilderness is a murder. Many are accidents. It is not that mountains are malicious. They are indifferent. The lesson is more specific. When a person vanishes in the line of duty, every detail matters. The vehicle, the objects left behind, the purpose of the trip, the crime being investigated, the people in the area, the response of the family, the failures of the search, the stories that persist, the names that do not fade. For 90 years those details waited. Eventually, they formed enough of a shape for investigators to close the case. But the shape remains incomplete. And perhaps that is why the story continues to hold attention. A complete answer allows the mind to leave. An incomplete answer keeps it there. With Teed, we can understand what likely happened, but we cannot stand where it ended. We cannot follow his final steps. We cannot recover the body. We cannot ask the accused man what he did. We cannot ask the boys what they saw. We cannot ask Alma what she carried through the years. We cannot ask his sons what closure would have meant when they were still young. We receive the story after almost everyone has left it. That is the emotional weight. A case can be solved too late. It can be true and still incomplete. It can offer closure and still hurt. Near Boulder Gulch, the land continues as land does. Trees grow, water moves, snow falls, summer returns. People pass without knowing exactly where a warden vanished. The cemetery remains a point on the map. The old car is gone. The men who searched are gone. The poachers are gone. The family members who first suffered the loss are gone. But the name remains. Ellsworth Arthur Teed, Deputy Game Warden. Lost in the line of duty. Missing since August 28, 1934. Officially declared dead in 1942. Honored nearly 90 years later. Case closed with a suspect named still not recovered. That final phrase is the echo. Still not recovered, because every disappearance story has two endings. The explanation. and the return. Ellsworth Teed received one. He has not received the other, and until the mountains give back whatever remains, if they ever do, there will always be a part of this case that stays in Boulder Gulch, not as a myth, not as a ghost story, as a real absence. A man who drove to the edge of a cemetery, locked his car, left his lunch inside, walked into the woods to enforce the law, and never came back. There is another reason the Teed case can carry a long film without needing invention. It is not only a mystery about a missing man. It is a portrait of a system before that system was ready for the dangers it faced. In the modern world, an officer entering a potentially dangerous scene might have radio contact. A dispatcher might know the exact time of departure. A partner might be assigned. A vehicle might be tracked. A body camera might record the encounter. A phone might hold the final signal. A search team might begin with digital coordinates. But in 1934, Teed stepped into Boulder Gulch with almost none of that. His wife knew where he was going. The area knew why he might be there. His car marked the edge of the known world. After that, the record depended on witnesses, terrain, and luck. That absence of modern evidence is not a flaw in the story. It is the condition of the story. It explains why the case could remain open for so long. It explains why a large search could fail without producing a definitive sequence. It explains why family memory could become important generations later, and it explains why the viewer has to approach the case differently than a modern disappearance. This is not a case of missing data. It is a case from before the data existed. That makes every physical detail heavier. The locked car matters more. The lunch matters more. The coat matters more. The coat matters more. The shallow deer graves matter more. The fact that he was expected at a funeral matters more. Because there are so few fixed points, each one has to carry weight. A viewer should feel that limitation. They should feel what it meant to search without certainty, to send men into trees with no signal to follow, to call in dogs and still not know where to go, to look down from an airplane and see only ridges, timber shadows, and the same impossible question. Where could a man disappear so completely? The answer may be that he did not disappear by accident. That is the conclusion officials eventually reached, but even a deliberate concealment needs a landscape willing to cooperate. And North Idaho offered that. The terrain around Mullan could hide a body because it was built from layers. Roads giving way to trails, trails giving way to gulches, gulches giving way to timber, timber broken by rock brush, water, and old mining disturbance. A searcher might cover a slope and still miss a depression. A volunteer might walk within yards of something and never see it. A body concealed quickly and deliberately could become almost unrecoverable if the people who hid it chose the place well. That is a grim thought, but it is more plausible than magic and more frightening than myth, because it means the mystery depended on human knowledge of the land. Someone who knew where to hunt might also know where to hide what had happened. Someone who knew how searchers would approach from the road might know where not to leave evidence. Someone who lived in that landscape could use its complexity against the people trying to find the truth. That possibility gives the Teed case its enduring darkness. The mountains did not have to swallow him on their own. They only had to protect the secret after people created it. There is also the question of the two teenagers named in the later account. John Robert Pentland and Oscar Downing were described in later reporting as young people connected to the event. The public account does not give a full psychological portrait of them. It does not tell us what they understood in the moment. It does not tell us whether they acted from fear, obedience, panic, loyalty, or pressure. But their presence, if the later account is accurate, changes the moral temperature of the story. It means the secret did not belong to one person alone. It means others may have carried knowledge from the beginning. And when young people are present at a violent event, the story can travel for decades in distorted form, not always as confession, sometimes as warning, sometimes as a family burden, sometimes as something said once and never repeated. The public does not know how the story moved through those families, but the sheriff's office later said separate people came forward with corroborating accounts. That means the story survived. It survived long enough to outlive the people accused of taking part in it. It survived long enough to reach investigators when the case returned to public attention. That survival is one of the most haunting facts in the entire case. The body vanished. The story did not. And in the end, the story became the only body of evidence still capable of movement. There is a strange irony in that. Searchers spent weeks looking for physical remains in 1934. They searched hills, gulches, roads, and water. They called in dogs and planes. They could not find him. But decades later, the answer may have been located not in the terrain, but in memory, not under soil, inside people. That is why cases like this should not be dismissed as too old. Old does not mean empty. Old means altered. The evidence changes form. Sometimes it becomes weaker. Sometimes it becomes impossible to verify. But sometimes it becomes safer to reveal. The people who were afraid are gone. The people who would have been shamed are gone. The people who might have retaliated are gone. And what remains is the need to set something right. In that sense, Teed's case is about the long afterlife of wrongdoing. A crime does not end when the victim disappears. It continues in every person who has to live with the uncertainty. It continues in every false lead. It continues in every search that fails. It continues in every child who grows up without a father. It continues in every family story told too quietly. It continues until someone names it. And even then it may not fully end, because naming the wrong does not undo the years. It only changes the shape of the silence. The Teed case lives in a difficult zone. Too old for the strongest forensic proof, too corroborated to remain only folklore, too closed to be treated as a completely open mystery, too physically incomplete to feel finished. That is exactly why it belongs on Silent Echo. It is not simple. It refuses the easy version. It asks the viewer to sit with uncertainty without turning that uncertainty into fantasy. The emotional center of this case is not George Pentland. It is not the poachers. It is not the speculation about the body. The emotional center is the moment Alma realized her husband had not come home and that this absence was unlike him. Everything else grows from that. The search, the rumors, the death declaration, the memorial, the closure, the unanswered location, a wife waiting, 3 sons losing a father, a community walking the hills, a family carrying a question through generations. If the documentary drifts too far into procedural history, it loses the ache of the case. If it drifts too far into emotion, it loses the discipline of the facts. The balance is the story. A hard factual spine with a quiet emotional weight. And that balance protects the case from becoming cheap. There is no need to call Boulder Gulch cursed. There is no need to imply Teed vanished into something unearthly. The real story is darker because it is human. Poaching is human. Fear is human. Violence is human. Fear is human. Silence is human. And a truth passed down through families for 90 years is human too. The tragedy is not that we cannot imagine what happened. The tragedy is that we can. A man in his working clothes. A duty that took him from the road into the trees. A confrontation connected to illegal game. A death concealed well enough that a county could search for weeks and find nothing. A family left with uncertainty. A name finally restored. No supernatural force is needed. Only the worst and most ordinary possibilities of people. And then time. Time did the rest. It erased tracks. It scattered witnesses. It buried documents. It weathered landscapes. It turned living suspects into names in old records. It changed immediate grief into inherited grief. Then after almost 90 years, time gave something back. Not the body, not the full scene, but enough of the story for investigators to say the search for an explanation was over. That is not a perfect ending. But it is an ending with weight. And for Ellsworth Arthur Teed, who walked into Boulder Gulch as a deputy game warden and disappeared from the public record, for generations even that late recognition matters. because forgetting is another kind of disappearance. And in this case, he was not forgotten. His name came back. His work came back. His death was named. The official record shifted toward the truth his family had waited for. The only thing that did not come back was the man himself. If you have thoughts on the Ellsworth Arthur Teed case or on the way old family stories can become evidence decades later, leave them in the comments. Please keep the discussion grounded and respectful, because this was not only a mystery. It was a family loss, a line of duty death, and a wound that stayed open for nearly 90 years. If you want more quiet, serious investigations into real disappearances, cold cases, and unresolved histories, subscribe to Silent Echo. And if this story held your attention, please like the video. It helps the channel continue telling cases like this with care, restraint, and respect. Thank you for watching, and stay with Silent Echo for the next investigation.